attending our final reading of the book, White Fragility by Diangelo. I see that there are a couple of new faces, so I would like to go ahead and introduce you to our co-facilitators. Dr. Michael Gerald, Reverend Dr. Michael Gerald is a graduate of Trenton State College and Princeton Theological Seminary. He has a doctorate degree from Eastern University's Palmer Theological Seminary in the area of psychology of leadership renewal. Dr. Gerald formerly served as a law enforcement executive and is now the senior pastor of Shiloh Baptist Church in Tuckahoe, New York, where he resides with his family. Dr. Sherry Frazier is the Provost Emerita and Professor of Social Work at Concordia College in Bronxville, where she served for 36 years and just retired in June. After graduating from college in 1977, Sherry accepted a social work position at Gary Neighborhood Services in Gary, Indiana. She notes that her experiences in Gary provided the most meaningful education she has received thus far. Dr. Frazier's 3 children attended Tuckahoe schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, graduating from Tuckahoe High School in 1999, 2001, and 2003. So welcome to Dr. Frazier and Gerald, and this is your final session. I know you guys have been working very hard to to do your best in an hour and a half to summarize and to give content to people who have joined us. Just want to go over a few housekeeping things. If you do not want to be on camera, just know that this is being recorded for future replay. So I see many of you do not have your cameras on, so just want to make sure everyone knows that. I also want to acknowledge any elected officials who are with us. I see Trustee Renee Howell is here. If there is anyone else, I'd ask that you identify yourself. I don't see anyone else so far. I also want to ask everyone to please mute your phones until you're called to speak. If you would like to raise your hand, you may do so by going to participants and going to the More tab, and you can raise your hand there. You can also just type a question in the chat bar if you don't feel like going through all of that, and I will ask the question for you. Let's see. Please keep your comments or questions brief so that we can give a chance for everyone to ask their question or to share any insights. So thank you all for joining us. I will turn it over to Dr. Sherry Frazier and Michael Gerald.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Dr. Frazier, did you want to say something before I?
Not at all.
Okay. So this is the final session or final time together with White Fragility. And we thought we would begin because we were told that many of the participants from previous sessions had questions about some statistical data and other concerns that weren't addressed. So we thought we would back up some and then provide some statistical data as well as some other appending information that might encapsulate what we are talking about. And so I'm going to share a brief video with us that sort of, it's actually one of the quotes that the writer uses in one of her earlier chapters, and I think it's chapter 4. But I'm going to use this quote or this snippet and allow us to see it. Can you all see that screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes.
So this is a clip of the famous writer James Baldwin in an interview on presumably some television broadcast, and you'll be able to hear the content of what he is talking about.
I would like to add someone to our group here. Professor Paul Weiss, the Sterling Professor of Philosophy at Yale. were you able to listen to the show backstage?
I heard a good deal of it, but then I was behind the prosecutor.
Yes.
So I heard only some of it.
Did you hear anything that you disagreed with?
I disagreed with a great deal of it. And of course, there's a good deal I agree with. But I think he's overlooking one very important matter, I think. Each one of us, I think, is terribly alone. He lives his own individual life. He has all kinds of obstacles in the way of religion or color or size or shape or lack of ability. And the problem is to become a man.
Well, what I was discussing was not that problem, really. I was discussing the difficulties, the obstacles, the very real danger of death thrown up by the society when a black man attempts to become a man.
All this emphasis upon black man and white does emphasize something which is here, but it emphasizes it or perhaps exaggerates it, and therefore makes us put people together in groups which they ought not to be in. I have more in common with a black scholar than I have with a white man who's against scholarship. And you have more in common with a white author than you have with someone who's against all literature. So why must we always concentrate on color or religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men.
I'll tell you this. When I left this country in 1948, I left this country for one reason only, one reason. I didn't care where I went. I might have gone to Hong Kong, I might have gone to Timbuktu, I ended up in Paris, on the streets of Paris, with $40 in my pocket on the theory that nothing worse could happen to me there than it already happened to me here. You talk about making it as a writer by yourself. You have to be able then to turn up all the antenna with which you live, because once you turn your back on this society, you may die. You may die. And it's very hard to sit at a typewriter and concentrate on that if you're afraid of the world around you. The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger visible in the face of every cop, every boss, everybody. I don't know what most white people in this country feel. I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That's a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians, and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
So that's basically James Baldwin refuting what another social scientist had decried or had sort of put forth to challenge his assessment of what it meant to be black in America. And some of the claims that came forth in that clip challenge or actually set up nicely for us to look at some of the other statistics that that we want to talk about. And here's you could read through it. This, as reported by the Washington Post, race remains the most volatile flashpoint in any accounting of police shootings. Although black men make up 6% of the United States population, they account for 40% of unarmed men shot to death by police this year. A hugely disproportionate number, 3 in 5 of those killed after exhibiting less threatening behavior were black or Hispanic. According to the Bureau of Justice, whites were more likely than blacks or Hispanics to have contact with police. Disproportionate numbers in that blacks make up only 12 or 13% of the population, while Hispanics account for 17 to 18%, and whites almost 60%. And police were equally likely to initiate contact with blacks and whites, about 11% each, but were less likely to initiate contact with Hispanics. These are statistics that Baldwin alludes to the terror, the psychological terror that he refers to about being Black in America. And from Diangelo's book on page 31, you'll find this list, the 10 richest Americans, 100% are white. This reinforces the idea that systemic racism is real. U.S. Congress, 90% white. United States governors, 96% white. Top military brass, 100% white. Current President of the United States and Vice President, 100% white. Current White House cabinet, 91% white. U.S. Freedom Caucus, 99% white. Television brass, 93% white. Publishers, it's all publishers of books, 90% white. News media, 85% white. Music producers, 95% white. Filmmakers, 95% white. All of the teachers in the United States, 82% of them are white. Professors at universities, both private and public, 84% are white. Owners of football franchises, 97% white, despite the players being about 75% minority. Other important statistics, we have statistics on home ownership, education, employment, police contact, again, incarceration rates, marital status as an influence of poverty, single parent statistics, and infant and maternal mortality rates. Here is just a brief slide. I don't know if you could see it that well. I tried to shrink it, but this is the racial wealth gap in terms of numbers. In a later slide, there is, based on CNBC reporting, it will take African Americans roughly 228 years to catch up to where white people are presently, and 84 years for Hispanics to catch up with white people presently, if assuming the gap doesn't widen anymore. That's a very, very troubling statistic. But here you see, based on income, the highest level of income, of course, is enjoyed by white folks, followed by other net worth. Of course, white people have more net worth than everyone else. You can see Black net worth and Hispanic net worth and other net worth. And you can see how the primary residence, 73% of white people own or are buying their homes as compared to the rest, 45% of African Americans and 46% of Hispanic Americans and other Americans, 54% vehicles, retirement. So you can see how, structural, and we can't really see structural racism in these pictures, but you know that something is at play. And this is particularly noticeable as we get to this particular slide, where when you look at the median net worth, now white persons without any bachelor's degree have a higher net worth than Black or Hispanics with a college degree. And so you can see how there's something going on. We can't put our finger on structural or systemic racism, but it's curious, at least to me, that a person, a non-person of color without a college degree can amass more wealth than persons with college degrees. Now that, some people may explain that away based upon, being, coming from certain families or having certain habits or, not, wasting or being frivolous with, income, or we can attribute to any other number of things. But it was not uncommon, even when in my particular, my first vocation, which was policing, for those of us who had college degrees to, to work alongside of our counterparts who had only a high school diploma, and yet were many of them were outpacing us because of nepotism and other things. But you know, that's the reality. This is educational attainment, and this is a statistic. I'm gonna try and do this. I don't know how it's gonna work. Do you all see that? This is, you know, all ethnic groups in America according to their educational achievement. Here are his white folks are the leading educated persons in America, followed by Asians, and then African Americans. And you see African Americans, almost 12% have less than a high school diploma. 33% of high school graduates, some college, 20%. And then when you move to Hispanics, you know, virtually, you know, similar kind of, only they have less Hispanics have high school diplomas, and roughly the same amount of high school graduates. But these are some of the statistics that are, you know, available that explain or may explain some of the condition for which systemic racism is captured. Employment statistics, again, 58% of Blacks as compared to 60% of whites, 62% of Asians, and 63% of Hispanics are employed. Hispanics account for 17% of total employment, but were substantially overrepresented in several detailed occupational categories, including painters, construction, and maintenance, miscellaneous agricultural workers, and maids and housekeepers and cleaners. So if you know anything about the evolution of the American workforce, historically, those jobs which are called, you know, unskilled or manual laborers or even service economies used to be primarily predominantly held by African Americans, and so today Latino Americans are more employed in those sectors. Black Americans are, you know, somewhat becoming more professional, however, still less likely to be as well employed as white folks or Asians. Police contact with the public, according to the Bureau of Justice. Here are the statistics. The portion of United States residents age 16 or older who had contact with police in preceding 12 months declined. And this is from 2015. Let me go back. The disproportionality of contact is still higher with Blacks because Blacks make up less of the percentage of population. So 20% of Black folks are come in contact with police as opposed to 23% white folks. And so that's a disproportionate amount of contacts with the police. Although the numbers are higher for white contact, disproportionately, Blacks are come in contact with the police force more. And as it relates to mass incarceration, again, the Bureau of Justice Statistics reports that 35% of state prisoners are white, 38% are Black, and 21% are Hispanic. Again, disproportionality. More African Americans are incarcerated than any other persons disproportionately. Michelle Alexander, in her book, The New Jim Crow, wrote that there are more African Americans in prison today than were enslaved in 1850. There's about 1.3 million state prisoners. There's another 226 federal prisoners that are incarcerated today. And, you know, in total, all encompassing jails, prisons, federal prisons, juvenile justice, there's 2.3 million people incarcerated in the United States.
Michael, oh, you still have more. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You got a question?
No. Just comment, but I'll save it until you're done with these statistics. I have some to add to it.
Okay. Well, go ahead. Jump right in.
Well, I was just going to say the issue of the criminal justice system. African Americans make up about 13% of the general population, but 40% of the prison population.
Right.
So again, the disparity in numbers in terms of population. The other that came to me was this idea of African American drivers are 30% more likely to be pulled over by police. 30% more likely. And motorists, this is another interesting, motorists are less likely to stop for a Black or African American person crossing in the crosswalk than they are a white person.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And there are two others. Let me just throw them in and then we'll keep going. With respect to housing, African Americans are shown 18% fewer homes and 4% fewer rental units than whites.
Wow.
Okay. So this idea of redlining that was supposed to be outlawed in the 60s is still alive and well. And in effect, it's just been masked by other realities that people can then not as easily determine that that's what's happening. And the last one is that the area of healthcare, and you may be getting to that, but 67%, over a third of doctors have a bias against African American patients. And how that's determined and how this data was collected obviously can always be suspect. But based on my own experiences and the things that we've been studying and reading and living through, it's pretty accurate as far as my experience has been.
Yes, indeed. So these are just, random statistics that we sort of collected. And this has to deal with marital status and single parents' influence in poverty. And just one thing I want to raise from this slide, 70% of white children ages 0 to 18 and roughly 59% of Hispanic children are living with both their biological parents. Only a little more than 1/3 of Black children live with both parents. And this other statement I want to raise up, actually, in his book, William Julius Wilson, it's called I forget the name of it. Anyway, he did a study in the 80s, early 90s maybe, and it talked about Truly the Disadvantaged. That's the name of the book, Truly the Disadvantaged. Children growing up in single parent families typically do not have the same economic or human resources available as those growing up in two-parent families. Compared with children in married couple families, children raised in single parent households are more likely to drop out of school, to have or cause a teen pregnancy, and to experience a divorce later in their adulthood. So these are just some of the statistics. I mean, we have others on maternal and infant mortality.
Can I jump in with a question that's related to what you just talked about, Michael? There are two questions, actually. There's one that was posted publicly, and then there's another one that says, how is the issue of single parent homes tied to racism? Why is that white people's fault?
Okay, so one of them, and again, I didn't touch on this, but in this slide, you see structural factors, for example, declining employment prospects and rising incarceration rates for unskilled Black men. So you asked the question about why. Well, one of the reasons that social scientists believe that this is a thing and this is an issue, has to do with how our communities are over-policed, so that, you know, young Black men are going to jail at a higher rate than are any other persons. And some believe that this has a direct correlation with the fact that Black women are not able to select, you know, men who are in the community or are thriving as a result of incarceration rates. So that's one reason. The other reason is, you know, we have other structural racial problems that exist in our environments. Things that, you know, from, you know, drug dealing and other things that young Black men get involved in because, you know, there are no jobs, right, to speak of in the hood, or because, you know, the jobs that are there pay minimum wage, and if I can flip a brick and make, you know, $3 grand as opposed to flip a burger and make, you know, $3.50 an hour, you know, common sense would dictate that the more enterprising way to make a living would be to become, you know, a street huckster.
So someone asked, what does it mean to flip a brick?
You know, sell drugs, or get involved in, you know, the narcotic game. So and structural racism, you know, makes that you know, it wouldn't be on our radar screens. However, it makes that an option for young people who have less less positive influences in their lives as you or I. I thought that this was an interesting statistic, and it has to do with the realities of the immigrant population, and that the United States is the only developed nation with a rising maternal mortality rates, and it's due in large part to our policies, our political policies and healthcare policies that, you know, are restrictive for those persons who are coming to America and are, you know, impregnant and can't access healthcare. And infant mortality rates in the United States continue to, you know, be an impact on non-Hispanic Blacks. So, you know, there are problems in the healthcare system as is in the economic sector overall. And so those are just some of the statistics that I compiled. And Dr. Frazier, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
I just want to go back to the point about healthcare and the healthcare system, and the reality that we as a society are biased towards serving the African American population, the Black population. And I'm talking about 67%. That is, you know, close to two-thirds, I'm sorry, of, you know, the population of African American people that may want to get the kind of health care and may be able to, but that doctors are not willing to see them.
Right.
So there is a question that has been posed by Darrell Taylor. Being that tonight is the last night, hopefully we can hear from some of the very people that the author is actually referring to, white people, when she talks about white people being in denial that systemic racism either exists or whether or not they're actually racist themselves, and how do they react when the topic of racism comes up.
Well, I certainly can't answer that question.
Well, some of the things that we, you know, Doctors Frazier and Gerald and I met, you know, we've met in between sessions to talk about requests that were made. And one of the requests that were made at the last session were statistics, which they've just gone over. And then there was also a question about where do we go from here? And they're going to address that. What can white people actually do to address the issue of white fragility? What do they do personally? And so I know that you two will be touching on that,
Mhm.
or more Dr. Frazier.
Right. So would you repeat the initial question that you raised from?
The comment being
Yes.
that it's the last night, hopefully we can hear from some of the white people that the book is actually referring to when Diangelo talks about white people being in denial that systemic racism either exists or whether or not they themselves are actually racist, and how they react when the topic of racism comes up.
Right. So
So I'm just going to ask Janet to go ahead and speak. She has her hand up.
okay.
You can unmute, Janet.
Janet. Janet who?
Janet Truslow.
Okay.
I was raised in the South. Grew up in North Carolina and then lived in Atlanta for 45 years. So I have a slightly different perspective on this than I've heard here. I think it's widely accepted in the South that whites are racist and that there is systemic racism, based on the fact that people are more aware of how they grew up, being told that blacks were not as good. It's a lot more open and out on the surface. Since we've started talking about this since the Black Lives Matter movement started recently, I have become more and more aware every few days of something that I say or do or feel that is very racist, and that I had no idea. It never occurred to me until it was pointed out to me by someone on TV or some outside source that let me know that that was a racist thought. I have recently been looking for a place to live, another place to live, and talking about our master bedroom did not occur to me that that was racist. And it does not, my saying that was not from a perspective of master over slave, but it very definitely is from that perspective for Black people. So whether or not I think it's racist or I agree with it, the very fact that Black people are offended by it is a reason for me to stop saying that.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Janet. That's a profound statement, and sharing of your own experiences that is really what this whole experience over the last 4 weeks has been about, is really being honest and being able to talk about what we've experienced, what we've seen, and understanding it in all of its complexities, both emotional as well as lived, as well as spiritual, economic, you name it. There's so many dimensions to it. And I think chapter 11 tries to get at that a little bit when we're looking at women and how they respond to situations and experiences, and how it's perceived as not so much the emotions are not about feeling badly about a situation, but feeling guilty about something that they had no necessarily responsibility for, but because of this guilt that we've carried and not owned and not really been able to be open to. And
there's also a great deal of difference between racism and bigotry, which I have not heard addressed here. That racism seems very innocuous. It's not, but it has that feeling. Bigotry is a whole nother thing of having ardent dislike and hatred for someone else and actually acting out on those feelings with a very mean-spirited, I want to hurt you kind of feeling behind it. And I think so many we white people are very racist without having the bigotry with that. I'm through now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a kind of soft, a soft racism, if you will, as opposed to bigotry, which is hardened, and the expressions are disdainful. And some would say that it's a distinction without a difference. If you ask some African Americans, they would see structural racism and systemic racism as bigoted forms of racism that keeps Black folks, as Baldwin says, in the ghetto, undereducated, underemployed, and without life chances or choices. Because sometimes it is the case that when this racism is enacted, it removes any possibility of people having better chances, even when you are exercising your own judgment. It's only in a certain sort of arena that you're able to exercise those choices. And so soft bigotry is sometimes expressed as very racist ideals. Dr. Fraser?
Yes, I have a hard time in myself trying to pull those two things apart. Certainly racism and bigotry merge in different ways. But ultimately what it sounds to me like, what it feels like to me like, and I think what it looks like is that it's just semantics. It's the language. And we need to be able to appreciate the behaviors, the way we value or disregard people that are different. And, in the South, I know I have two brothers that probably carry both of those titles. They're both bigots and they're both racists. And I can't talk to them. I can't have a conversation with them, because I don't want to get into an argument and try to convince them of something that they are so steeped in that it hurts me. It makes me feel very sad for them that they're missing out on so much of what human beings are capable of. And interestingly, Janet, they talk about, well, I have this friend or this coworker who happens to be African American, and we're great buddies. And so what's the big deal? The big deal is we're talking about people, human beings in relationships beyond a friendship or beyond a work colleague. How we treat people beyond those that are known to us is what becomes the pervasive racism and bigotry that portion of our population doesn't even realize they're enacting. And so part of this is about just raising consciousness, using the terms and the language and having discussions without being afraid of stepping in something. It's okay to talk about whatever it is we need to talk about if we're willing to listen.
Yeah.
So Dr. Fraser, there is a question for you.
Yes.
Can you talk about how white people should respond when people of color call them out on their racism?
Well, that's a loaded question. But my gut reaction is to listen. And, I can't see everything that someone else sees about me. So I have to begin, and I do all the time. I begin even in the classroom. I always defer to my students and listen to them when they may disagree with something or they may question something, that I'm not the be all and end all, and I don't know everything. And so if someone brings something to me, whether, you know, we're students in the classroom or colleagues or other people from, you name it, any kind of background, I am willing to be open to listening and to learning what it is that I don't know about myself or about the other person. And it's not about just, you know, saying, oh, whatever, I'll listen to anything. It's not that either. It's a willingness to hear people from where they come from and what their experiences have been, and to be able to honor that and value that for that given person's reality. Because their reality, one African American or one Black person's reality, may never be another African American or Black person's reality. And so that you know, creates complexity that we don't see when we have these conversations. We kind of winnow it down to Black or white, and it isn't. No, but nothing is that simple when we deal with human beings. And so we have to be willing and open to listening, and really listening without the filters that we put on because we become defensive. I don't know what I don't know, and I don't want anybody to know that I don't know what I don't know. So I'm going to fake it till I make it. And that's our problem. And I say that our in terms of, you know, white people, and our willingness to be open to learning about the other. And the other is, yes, you know, African American, Blacks, but it's also about so many other people because we live in a global society.
She talks in chapter 10 about racial stamina and building up racial stamina. And a lot of times I do hear, I see the people getting defensive immediately because it's like, you're telling me I'm a bad person, or you're telling me I'm an evil person. And in her book, she talks about it's on me to build my racial stamina. So how do you do that? How do you build your racial stamina when, you know, you might be attacked because people are angry, or you might, you know, get comments that make you very uncomfortable? How do the people who are listening in, who are saying, okay, this all sounds great, but how do I actually pull that off?
I think some of the ways in which you build capacity to hear criticism, because I think that's what you're really talking about. I think what we're saying is that we have to build a capacity to embrace the humanity of someone else, without dismissing what it is that they are saying, or without even having a justification for what we've done to anger, hurt, bother, or upset someone else. And Dr. Fraser, you know, I think said it right. We have to be willing to hear. We have to be able to seriously use tools. And the problem is that we don't really know how to communicate with one another, right? We have been taught that, you know, we have been in an exercise of debating more than conversing, right? And so a debate is designed to win an argument, or to get a person from one point to my point, right? And we want to obliterate everything else that has been said. And so, but when you converse, or when you're in dialogue is not one-dimensional. Dialogue is circular, and it keeps going. So when you're in a dialogical conversation with another person, you're trying to build on what the experience is. You're not trying to end it. Ending conversations or rebuttal conversations are when you use words like but, if, you know, or. A dialogical conversation maximizes on the word and, because we don't want the conversation to end. And so if I offended you, or when I offend you, and you alert me to it, it's my responsibility to enter into that space. But it takes tools. It takes tools of reflection. It takes tools of listening. It takes tools of processing. And when you say things like this, many people, especially in my ethnicity, I'm just going to tell you, we don't know how to communicate at all. We are horrible at communication, right? I'm talking about Black men are horrible at communicating, right? And it's because we have not been, we have not sat with information. We have not really listened to, or we have not, really, embraced the other and their humanity. We've rushed on to have an excuse, to have a defense, to have something that invalidates or rebuts what the claim is. We have not been taught to really listen. And I would even say that that's a male trait. There are some men who are absolutely gifted at, being humble enough to accept the criticism that are leveled at their feet without showing some degree of bravado. But most people in general, I do believe, don't know how to communicate, don't know how to enter into a space where we can hold or own or walk with or journey with someone else through their, either difficulty or hurt. And as a result, the expression that I love to use in the pulpit is, hurt people, right? And so, however you've been put upon, is how you will, enact that same level of retribution to someone else. And it's indicative of what the sociologists claim, that the oppressed will manifest traits of their oppressor.
Okay, we have a comment. We have a comment in the chat box, and then Donato, you can unmute when I read the comment to share. This is from Daryl Taylor again. Economics plays a huge role in incarceration. When you have the finances to hire the best lawyers, that goes a long way in determining the outcome of the court cases and decisions on whether or not someone actually gets sentenced to do time or not. There are relationships that are formed with prosecutors, district attorneys, and judges, and it is much more likely that a white family will have access to someone in those circles than people of color. Many cases are able to be settled with fines, and restitution is readily available to people who have the financial means to pay for the mistakes that they have made. And it just so happens that Daryl Taylor works in corrections. And I hope that wasn't a secret, Daryl.
He was there last time I was locked up, so I'm thinking still.
Don't say that. So Donato, you can unmute and share.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add some of my own experiences to the conversation that's been had so far about how white people are, find ways to communicate effectively about racism. And, I, of course, and I completely understand that's a difficult conversation. Of course, I would never say that it was an easy one. I agree with Michael that, some people have a harder time communicating than others. And I agree with Sharmi that, of course, listening is this key thing. But just to give you some background about where I'm coming from, because to me, the whole thing has been a journey. I'm not an expert, but I feel like I found things that worked for me to have important conversations about racism. And I grew up in Eastchester. I'm a lifelong Eastchester resident. Some of you know me on this call. But I actually, and I'm a bit older than I look. I actually was around in the early 60s. I grew up in Eastchester in the early 60s. And I witnessed a horrible racist. There's a lot more racism in Eastchester in the 60s. It was much more explicit than it is now. And I'm embarrassed to say it almost, but I was in the middle of it. I mean, I was in an environment where I saw a lot of racism. Fortunately for me, my parents were not. But they weren't anti-racist either. And we had one horrible incident that happened. My dad had workers in his shoe repair shop that were African-American, and he had barbecues every summer. And one summer, this horrible person across the street called my mom. And I was there when my mom took the call, and he said, why why are you having black people in your, it was probably worse than that, but why are you having black people in your property? They were in the front yard. These two young girls were dancing around a tree. And I was actually watching them as like a 6-year-old. I was just kind of sitting there at the window watching it and thinking it was cute as a 6-year-old. But I remember thinking, you know, this is, as a kid, it was like startling that someone would actually say that, because I actually heard the call was so loud. But that was one of my first experiences with racism that was very vivid that I can tell you about. But there's, you know, throughout my years, I think in Eastchester and my personal life, it became a lot less explicit. But what happens in real life for a white person, I think, is that people will joke about racism, and they'll make jokes, they'll snicker. And if you're a white person and you're not racist and you want to be anti-racist, what you can do is say, you know, first of all, you don't smile. In my younger years, I would nervously smile because I wasn't sure how to handle it. But as I got older, I was realizing that was contributing to it, and I was enabling it in some way and making it seem okay. So the first thing I used to do was just not laugh and smile at it, number one. And number two, I might even say something that is easy to say and then just remove myself from the situation, because I know that it's not easy for other people to talk about it, and they might actually become really defensive and belligerent. And nowadays with social media, I think people are almost a little bit more bold with it. It's less nuanced. I know that we're all dealing with this on social media, where people, you know, will try to fight. They're just the fact that they try to fight BLM to me means they're probably racist, right? If someone posts that, oh, I want to, you know, talk about Black Lives Matter, or, and then we see this on our own Eastchester community pages. It's pretty blatant. And people won't use the N-word or say something really that horrific, but they'll do things to signal that they've just sort of had enough of that BLM stuff, and et cetera. And the way, of course, to deal with that, I think, is to, you know, talk people on the sidelines about it if you can, if they're reasonable people. I do my best to reach out to people who I know might be sensitive to the conversation and make sure they understand my viewpoint on it. But other than that, I mean, I've actually had fights with people in the past month or so. I mean, I've actually had fights with family members because they texted me something that was just out of line. You know, they were quoting something Candace Owens said, which was ridiculous. And I would say, you know, that's racist. Sorry, please do not send this to me. And then a big fight. So I mean, sometimes I think it is worthwhile to fight, and I've done that. And you know, it's not easy though, and it's just sometimes it seems like an uphill battle, and you're never going to win. But I do think it's worth it to just keep saying it when you feel like it, and just deal with it. And then that person is actually a family member. Like we might not talk for a few weeks, and then all of a sudden we're talking again. They know my position. They've heard it. I feel good about the fact that I did it, even if it caused some distancing for a few weeks. But so I just wanted to share those experiences and tell you that, you know, I think, you know, there are ways of handling it, and it's up to people that feel strongly about racism and coping with it yourself, but also trying to be a little bit. I'm trying hard to be anti-racist, and I have to thank an employer. I worked at Consumer Reports for 21 years, and in the late 90s, I participated in a diversity training seminar, and I learned so much about how to confront racism. So, I mean, I think those kinds of programs, like formal programs, that was my transformation. Before that, I was really in the dark, and that was in my 30s. So I'll confess that I really wasn't thinking a lot about racism too much. I mean, I was never racist, really. We all have, you know, some degree of racism because you hear it, you see it, you snicker. But I don't think fundamentally I am, but I was really learning to be anti-racist because of a formal program at work, diversity training, and I became a part of the committee that ran the program. So, I mean, I really do think it takes a lot of education and pointed, you have to really drag people into these programs. Otherwise, they're just gonna be in denial the whole time.
Yeah, so I want to recap a few things that some of you have shared as far as how to address this, you know, since this was the big question, you know, how to respond if I'm a white person and how to address my own biases possibly. So a few things that jumped out. The first one was to listen, which Dr. Frazier stressed, to try to listen to the other person. And I loved Dr. Gerald's quote, embrace the humanity of someone else. if you try to listen and hear what other people's experiences are, just closing your eyes and not looking at them in terms of race, then maybe you can connect. So I really love that, embrace the humanity of someone else. I like Donato's comments. He said, don't laugh or smile when you hear someone making a comment that is off color, no pun intended. And that takes courage. That's not always an easy thing to do because, you know, peer pressure doesn't just exist when we're teenagers. It's, you know, it's
lifelong.
It's lifelong. Remove yourself from the conversation. You know, if you're not sure how to handle it, maybe you're not at the point where Donato is, where you can say, no, don't bring that over here. Maybe you just remove yourself and, you know, until you can build up that ability to be able to respond to it. And also talk to people on the sidelines. So maybe you don't want to address people in public as they're saying it because it's uncomfortable or they're not going to receive it. So talk to them later on. So those are some tips and some advice from some of the white people on the feed. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
And I think the writer makes the claim in chapter 12 that, you know, this isn't about perfection. This isn't about getting everything right all the time.
Right.
We have to know that we are imperfect. We're fallible. We're gonna mess up. And I think the key is that when we mess up, we fess up. We acknowledge that we made an error, and we don't minimize our mistake, but we seek to, you know, restore relationship as well as our integrity through the process. And you know, there have been many times that you know people have said and done things for which, you know, I didn't have the courage to confront them about their stuff. And this is where it becomes a two-way street, where, you know, it takes two people to be in a relationship with, if they're going to be in a relationship. If one person is committed to the relationship, then, you know, and one person isn't, then you might have to question whether or not you need to continue that friendship or whatever it might be. However, I just think that, you know, in terms of racial issues, it does demand that we be truthful, be considerate, and as you know, I'm a preacher. As the Bible teaches us, speak the truth in love. And when we do that, we can ensure that we maintain the integrity of those relationships.
Well, she does also talk about in the book that people may not come in peace and love if they're angry. So is it on the person of color to make it so that it's, you know, it's palatable for the white person, or is it on the white person to develop a stamina for hearing, you know, to developing their racial stamina? And there's, you know, therein lies the question. Some people say, well, you know, that I don't like the way they were talking to me. And other people say, well, it's on you to build up that stamina.
Right. You know, there is in chapter 10, you know, it resonated with me, and I termed it Kaepernicking, because of you know, Colin Kaepernick, and you know, and what Kaepernicking to me is exactly what the writer talks about. White fragility punishes the person given feedback and presses them back into silence, maintains white solidarity, the tacit agreement that we will protect white privilege and not hold each other accountable for our racism. When the grievant is Black, the charge is you're playing the race card. And all of these are, you know, present in the case of Colin Kaepernick, as he took a knee to call attention to police brutality and police killing of unarmed Black men. And so your question really is indicative of the fact that it is, the onus is on, white persons to build their capacity to hear and their capacity to listen and their capacity to, deal with, the realities. And the realities are that white supremacy is not Black people's burden. It impacts Black folks and brown folks, but it's not my burden. It's the burden of white folks to deal with that structural racism and white supremacy, and to accept that this country was built upon the foundation of white supremacy.
Thank you, Michael. I would also reinforce some of the things that Robin identified in chapter 11, specifically around white females. And, this idea of, the emotional eruptions that happen and the reaction to that, and the lack of validity that's given in so many instances when a white woman gets upset and emotional and, it feels bad for a Black colleague or, someone else that is Black that is being misunderstood, mistreated. And that's sometimes mistaken as some kind of solidarity toward that individual, toward that person that's not being understood or abused or judged. And we have to be very careful of that. And I don't mean to focus on women specifically, but I think women tend to be more emotive when it comes to being confronted or being feeling something that is hurtful or difficult to manage. And again, even to, as you say, acknowledge that what is happening is really happening. And, to be able to own that without the emotive reaction to it, because what that does is it shifts the attention to that white person. And in this case, as she's talking to white women, that now I am the one that's being hurt. I'm the one that's suffering from this. And so it's that kind of flip-flop that unless you've, allowed yourself to explore this and understand it as a woman and as a white woman, you wouldn't know that that may be part of what's happening for you, is that sense of, lack of understanding, feeling judged as opposed to that you're being compassionate, when in fact, you're probably not really being compassionate if you open yourself up and really try to understand the dynamic of the situation that you're in.
So Daryl Taylor has another message, and then Trustee Howell has raised her hand. You can come off mute when I read Daryl's message. And just so that everyone knows, Daryl is not yelling. He has all caps because he wants to see what he's writing. Just want to make sure everyone knows. When you are being represented by, and this is, I'm quoting, so just know that I'm quoting everything that he's saying. When you are being represented by a court-appointed lawyer instead of a paid lawyer, the court system is much more likely to negotiate a plea deal that 9 times out of 10 that ends up with those individuals doing time rather than any other outcome that doesn't end up with them going to jail. I have worked in the county jail for over 17 years and have seen both white and people of color being in jail for the same charges, and the outcome for those with paid lawyers is totally different when the cases are determined. Thank you to the gentleman who just commented on the racism in Eastchester. I have had personal experiences that were extreme to the point of being called nigger. Sorry, I lost it because there was more comments made. Being called nigger and all kinds of other disparaging names. I have been in physical alterations because of racism until people are willing to admit that systemic racism is real and alive today, just as it was 60 to 70 years ago. We will always remain in a place where being Black in America is a huge disadvantage. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And, you know, to Daryl's point, it doesn't matter who you are. And I told this story to Dr. Frazier and Trustee Andino. When I was hired as a New Jersey trooper in the 80s, one of my first calls was I was dispatched to a domestic in a place called Ringo's, New Jersey, which is, you know, just above Trenton. And, you know, I go, lights and siren, and I arrive with the full power of the state. I had on my uniform, you know, said New Jersey State Police on the arm. I had my gun. I had, you know, my badge, all of that. So I was official. I was in a marked police car. And to Daryl's point, you know, racism is real because I came to help a person who had called for help. And I was met with the most vile racism that I had experienced to that point in my life. And the woman who needed help looked at me and she noticed that I was of a different hue. And she told me, I don't care who you are, ain't no N-word coming in my house. And I was shocked. And, you know, I told my sergeant what had happened. And it didn't work out so well for them after all. Just, let's say everyone in the house got arrested that day. Not by me, but by those who worked on the same shift as I worked. And they couldn't believe the indignity that I had suffered. You know, so racism is real, and it doesn't matter where you are, what uniform you have on, or what position you occupy. You know, it's a real thing.
Okay, Trustee Howell.
So I just wanted to thank Dr. Frazier for bringing that point out in the book. I read this book with colleagues at work, and the whole white woman's tears piece caused a really, you know, open discussion. It was, you know, not only white women, but white men kind of being shocked by that kind of realization, like to stop and think. And you know, I've been in that situation myself where I've seen some things that brought me to tears, but the realization of stopping and realizing, you know, what you could take away from that, that to me was a very important thing to bring out in that book. So, so I appreciate you bringing that up. Another thing that came out from having this discussion with colleagues, and my colleagues, you know, I work as a scientist, so all my colleagues are scientists. And we had those discussions where, you know, scientists who walk through the store, you know, have been, if they're Black, they're followed by, you know, people concerned about them stealing stuff. And so it was just again, a shocking discussion to us, right? We're in an atmosphere where we're all colleagues, we're all scientists, and to think that in their experience once they walk out that door is very different from the rest of us. So it was I thought it was a really good thing for us to do at work.
We thank you, Trustee Howell. We have 15 minutes left. So I'm not sure if Drs. Frazier and Gerald have much more to cover. So I want to give you the opportunity to do that.
I want to play a video of misappropriation of white women's tears. And we all know the episode, but I'm going to play this video real quick. It's a short 1-minute video. Did I share my screen?
No, you have not.
I'm sorry. Let's see. Share. Yeah. Share.
Mhm. Now you have.
Okay.
Please stop. Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking pictures calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African-American, who has a bicycle helmet. He's recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble.
So if you notice that, you know, how her tone sort of begins to get a little more, you know, heightened in her description. And I think that's a clear case of how sometimes the misappropriation of a woman's emotions can redirect, you know, both attention as well as the severity of, you know, police involvement or whatever in her direction. And I think to Dr. Frazier's point, you know, we have to, I mean, not me, but, you know, we have to be clear when we are, you know, emoting in certain ways so as to not, you know, be offensive.
You know, thank you for sharing that, Michael, because, you know, I think about the years that I spent in Gary, Indiana, and there were many times that there were things that happened in the organization to single mothers, to daycare children, to senior citizens, and, you know, the confusion that I had about what I was feeling, because I couldn't quite understand. I remember actually one day, it was really hilarious, but it wasn't, is there were, you know, we have a senior citizens day that once a week we would take them by the van to go do their grocery shopping and bring them back to the center and then get them home at the end of the day. And there were two women that despised each other. And one was white and the other one was black. And they got into it on the van, and it was a food fight. You know, they were taking things out of their shopping bags and throwing them at each other. And just the intensity of their reactions to one another. And and again, it was a very mixed group of seniors. So and the rest of them were, you know, kind of came together as a whole unit of women saying, what is wrong with these two? So, you know, looking at what had happened and the kind of emotion that existed there between, and it was, you know, part of it was, I think, racially precipitated, but I think more of it was that these are two women that didn't like each other, and we know how women can get, and when they don't back down and they keep at each other, the only recourse for the one senior who happened to be African American, she felt so helpless. She started throwing potatoes and apples and whatever else she had in her shopping bags at the other person. And of course, you know, the resolution to that is a whole other story. But the truth is, these emotions come without even knowing what, you know, raises them up out of us. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a major drama. It doesn't have to be, it could be a word or a phrase that somebody uses that just sets another person off. And our ability to be able to hear that and to accept that I didn't really mean to say that and offend you, but I apologize if it did. And have that kind of compassion, empathy for another person, because if that's their lived experience in that interaction, then you honor it, you accept it, and you walk away from it and say, I don't think that's what I was doing. I'll look at it. But in the meantime, what's right to do is to say, I apologize. And that is, you know, part of what being mature, being self-aware. It doesn't mean you know about every population of people on the planet, but being self-aware and knowing what is right, what's appropriate, and how do we live in harmony with other people, and you know, not perpetuate what we all know. And by virtue of, you know, this book and our opportunity to be with everyone for the last 4 weeks helps all of us take ownership for part of that and say, yes, I need to examine, you know, how I feel and what I say, and, you know, what causes me to feel whatever those emotions might be.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts, questions as we come to a close soon? We still have a little more time. There were no other comments in the chat. I don't think anyone's raised their hand, but we do still have time.
So one of the things I want to just, you know, bring up is chapter 12, and, you know, the chapter itself, the chapter's title itself intrigued me, because in his last work before his untimely death, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote a book called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And I just, you know, I think that this chapter provides for us, you know, a roadmap towards healing, hearing, and perhaps restoring an ability for white persons to end patterns and practices of you know, their you know, sort of lived behavior, or their experience with, or their colluding with, as the writer says, white fragility. And so many ways, and she talks about having a transformed paradigm, one that exhibits gratitude, excitement, discomfort, constructive guilt, which is different than, you know, what they call white guilt, motivation, humility, compassion, and interest. And when, you know, when we embrace sort of these transformative paradigmatic, you know, themes, we can get to a place of reflection. We can get to a place of apology. We can get to a place of listening and processing, and even, you know, seeking greater understanding, and even grapple with some of the things that we, you know, some of the things that we do say and emote, or otherwise, you know, demonstrate. And I just think that, you know, that's a question that, for me, is, you know, the burning question: where do we go from here? If we want to be in community, if we want to be in relationship with others, if we want to be a part of a team, you know, it's important. It's important for us to really, you know, deal with our stuff and do our work. So much of this book just reminds me of the therapeutic process. in regards to, human dynamics and human psychology, so I think it's important that we as people, I'm going to say a four-letter word that I wouldn't ordinarily say in public. I say it in private enough. I wouldn't say it in public, but we got to deal with our shit, and sometimes we have to admit that we have some stuff that we need to deal with.
Amen.
So someone has a comment. As a Black person, this book offered some healing for me. To hear out loud a white person voice what we as a people have known and suffered through for years was a part of my healing.
Yeah, I agree. When I first read the book, I said to some people, man, I've known this forever, but I've never heard any white person admit this. And again, this is her slice. This is her truth. This isn't. I don't believe that it's necessarily a blanket truth for all people. I think that this is her truth, and as she has experienced life. But I think that it's nonetheless refreshing to know that, we are not, in Baldwin's terms, this is not a psychological terror of my own imagination. This is, what has faced many non-white persons in this country, and you just can't put a finger on it, and some of the statistics, while we don't have the evidence to back up the fact that redlining is a thing, these are all evidences of the realities that Black folks had to live with, Black and brown folks had to live with, and still to this day, 17% of Latinos are denied mortgages when they're perfectly qualified for a mortgage. So I mean, this is the kind of stuff that still happens today, So,
There's a comment from Sean McDevitt. In chapter 11, these sentences resonate especially connected to the stats that Dr. Gerald shared earlier. Upwards of 100% of the nation's major institutions are white and mostly male. White men occupy the highest positions in the race and gender hierarchy. Thus, they have the power to define their own reality and that of others. This reality includes not only whose experiences are valid, but who is fundamentally valid. This is how we have some of the worst laws, written mostly by white men, defining our own reality and not listening to the other perspectives beside our own. They're actually designing public policy that takes the perspectives of those most disadvantaged at the North Star of the redesigning how our society functions. If we design laws with those most disadvantaged in mind, we would get it right for everyone.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting topic because, to Dr. Gerald's point, when you're talking about people getting mortgages, and we look at in our own communities, let's not even talk about Eastchester. Eastchester doesn't really even have low-income housing, but even in Tuckahoe, we are also very segregated here. We have in the public housing units is the majority are Black and brown. And then in all of Tuckahoe, the rest of Tuckahoe, you see very few people who are Black and brown. So is it deliberate? People say, well, the board, this is from how many years ago that this was, these units were put in, but it speaks to that when you see such a segregated community. It's a diverse community, but it's a segregated community.
Yeah. And to the young fella who spoke earlier about Eastchester being racist, that still occurs today, where there are units of housing that the person who controls the units refuse to show them to Black and brown people in Eastchester. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I know we're at time and people are starting to say goodnight, so some final thoughts from you guys and then we can close out.
Dr. Frazier?
I just want to say thank you to everyone that's participated, and particularly for Omayra for being the catalyst for letting us have an opportunity to educate and to experience the kind of dialogue that we've had. It's been a tremendous experience for me, having been in this community for a lot of years, over 3 decades.
Dr. Gerald, final few words.
Yeah, so I ditto what Dr. Frazier said. I want to thank Trustee Andino for having the courage to lift this topic and to risk the currency of her elective office to undertake such a timely discussion. And I want to encourage us all to continue to do this work, to continue to commit to each other, continue to, embrace one another in the fullness of who we are, and continue to grow. Every day is an opportunity to learn, and let's continue to learn and continue to grow.
Thank you. So I just want to acknowledge that our Mayor Luisi has been here with us during this discussion. Thank you for joining us, Greg. I also want to respond to the question, where do we go from here? So a few people have recommended some books that they would like for us to continue reading so that we can continue learning and growing. And to Dr. Gerald's point, embracing the humanity of others. We're also looking at having some training similar to what I think Donato mentioned. It's a training that is called Undoing Racism, and it's a 2.5-day course that I am looking to bring to Tuckahoe for those who might be interested in going a little deeper. And so that's on the horizon. They're trying to figure out how to do this virtually. They've never done it virtually, and so COVID is forcing all of us to look for different ways to have the same kind of learning. So I just want to thank you all for joining us. These 4 sessions have been interesting, enlightening, and also sometimes heartbreaking when you come to some realities. But I appreciate the time that you guys took every Thursday for 4 Thursdays. I really want to thank Drs. Frazier and Michael Gerald for just offering their insights. It took time away from their families and from other more fun things like golf, I could imagine, that I appreciate it. So thank you very much for giving of yourselves and of your time. And I also want to thank, I don't know if Swadish is still here, our library. I think we have the most dynamic, supportive, we have the best library ever. So I appreciate Swadish, who's the director, as well as Elaine, whose mother-in-law passed away, so she couldn't be here with us, and Kaiti, who have been very helpful to me in putting this together. So thank you, Swadish.
Okay. I am still here, and it was very interesting. I tried to join all of the talks, and some of the talks I missed, but I tried to listen. And thank you very, very much, Omayra, for giving us the opportunity, and Dr. Michael Gerald and Dr. Sherry Frazier for your time and support. We really, really appreciate, and people of our community who participated. Thank you, everyone, once again.
So good night, Tuckahoe.